Howdy. We're going to end our session with 3 videos on privacy. And as I've said earlier, the tipping point in security, I believe, is now the issue of privacy. And this is where you will see a lot of court cases coming down. So 3 videos. I've added some on GDPR that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to highlight some issues. I'm going to talk about others. I'm not going to go through all the definitions here. The ones that I want you to know about is the Freedom of Information. The Freedom of Information Act, which is an act that you get access to, public access to U.S. government records. It's not easy. You know, you put in a FOIA request and they'll tell you all the reasons you can't. The state has a similar rule, the Open Records Act. This is all good. Everything's always good on paper. You also don't want nefarious people to be able to get things under FOIA, Open Records Act that could be of a risk of damage or harm to our nation or state. Again, I want to go through this quickly. We've talked a little bit about HIPAA. That's for privacy of medical records. Again, very misunderstood sometimes, what is private and what is not. What people miss is under the Affordable Care Act, passed under President Obama, aka Obamacare. One of the tenets of that law was to raise the fines under HIPAA. Before that, HIPAA didn't have a lot of teeth. You could do a business case and say, you know, it's cheaper just to pay the fines. Well, that went away. The original fines were based on the incident. So you had an incident. Well, did it compromise 5 records, 50, 500, 5,000, 50,000? Same fine. Under the ACA, that became based on the size of the breach. And it was interesting to watch. The first hospital that got fined $1 million, okay. The second got fined over $1 million, okay. By about the third time, when the old fines would have been probably about 150,000, there was a sea change in protecting that, okay. So some of these are all from your book. I'm not really interested so much in the privacy enhancing technology aspect as much as the privacy impact assessment. You need to be able to do a PIA. You need to understand what that is. The whole notion of privacy, when I said our definitions or notions of privacy come from court cases, we do have the Privacy Act of 1974. And it applies across the federal government. When I say our court cases talk about privacy, I mean our individual right to privacy, okay? This gives us rights under what the federal government can keep. Then we have red flags, red flag rule is, did identity theft occur? If there is a red flag, certain conditions are met, then you have to invoke these red flag rules. Safe harbor says a mechanism for doing something. It's like you're in a storm, but you can get into a harbor and be safe. Well, safe harbor is like protection against something happening. So you hear safe harbor talked about in relationship to different laws like the FTC, and it's basically what they're saying is, you can self-regulate, and that'll be your safe harbor. If you can prove to us that you took care of yourself, we won't regulate you. There used to be safe harbor provisions by the EU. Those are being retracted under GDPR. The safe harbor there was, well, if you're an EU company and you're doing business in the United States, well, you can come under their laws. And now the EU is saying, nah, I don't think so. We had a safe harbor, and then we had another privacy shield. Now, I need to tell you, GDPR was passed on May 25th, 2018, so we have just passed, the second holiday, the second monthly holiday. There's already been hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints filed. I always said they were going to target an American technology company. Facebook answered that challenge by giving them on a silver platter the incident this spring with the Cambridge Analytica, but they're targeting Google, Amazon, what have you. It's complicated. It's a mess. The law is hard to read. It contradicts itself. If you would go to the Privacy Act of 1974 site on the Department of Justice, you can read all about that act. It'll tell you all the court cases. It's hyperlinked. It's great. If you go to the GDPR section, they finally did get a hyperlinked website, but it turns out it's not an EU website. Last I checked, it was a law firm that did it. It's a law written by several different European countries. So, like I said, it's a mess. So privacy, he says, defines it as the power to control what others know about you and what they can do with that information. Okay? That's a definition we came up with because it is not in law. So anything that can personally identify us, sometimes this is also called SPI, but typically we go to PII is the legal definition. Now, here's another issue. GDPR now, what can personally identify you? Under the Texas Identity Theft Enforcement Protection Act, it was first name, last name, or first initial, last name, and then either a social security number or a driver's license number or a financial account number, something that would pick you out of the crowd. In these terms, in biometrics, the ITEP, the Identity Theft Enforcement Protection Act in Texas, does mention biometrics, but it's kind of like loosey-goosey language. The fact of the matter is, as technology goes and becomes more sophisticated, we're looking at PII now as what is those data elements that uniquely identify you, and it may be all biometric data. And this is what is also tough on GDPR. It basically says, yeah, it's this or this, quantitative, this or this, or it's those unique physical, national, cultural. I mean, it has a whole list of, characteristics that could uniquely identify you. So when we talk about what can identify you, right now, again, keep a close hand on what the PII is, or sometimes called he's got sensitive PII, but also you'll see it SPI, sensitive personal information. So in the United States, we tend to opt out as opposed to opt in. Now, there are the FIPA, Federal Information Privacy, some standards that go back to the 70s that say this is what all should be done. You should give notice. You should have choice. You should have consent. Their principles, fair information, privacy principles, I believe is a term for it. So that's all good and notice. But again, we aren't looking at the definitions. How is this implemented in the law? And GDPR again says constraint has to be consent explicit at every step. You cannot have automatic opt-in. You have to give 72-hour notice for data breaches, right? That's how it defines them. So when we took out the definitions, look at them in the context of the law. We do have identity theft in federal laws. We have GLB. But these aren't notions of privacy like we tend to think of privacy. The right to be let alone. Hey, I don't want to be on camera. Hey, you have no right to post that picture of me on the internet. Hey, you had no right to reveal that information on me. Hey, Facebook, you had no right to scrape my data, which I am not paying for a server for Facebook, so I'm not sure how I thought you were making money, and give it to Cambridge Analytica. Okay, so you all are protected under FERPA. And this came about in the 60s and 70s in this country. We had a big sea change on civil rights, on personal rights, on civil liberties, and the notions of privacy. So you see a lot of the important court cases on privacy coming about in the 60s and 70s. Roe v. Wade, I think, was January 73. And then you see the Privacy Act and the Freedom of Information Act coming in the 90s. And so the sea change in the United States was the 60s and 70s, both in statutes and in common law, case law, but also in a culture change, right? We want openness, we want disclosure, we want to know how our data is being used, we want to be able to correct our data, we want to be able to keep our data secure. And I urge you to take some time and go look at, just Google Privacy Act of 1974. Look for there's two ways you can look at it. Find the Department of Justice website first, but you can also go to the Electronic Privacy Information System on this as well. Okay, FOIA I've talked about. It's designed to enable public access to U.S. government records. It is not automatic. Believe me, I did open records request on a case I was involved in years ago in San Antonio. I got all kinds of, oh, no, you can't have that. Oh, no, you can't have that. Yeah, well, we just keep fighting. So it's not just you fill out a form and they send you the data. Okay? And you'll see more and more where the government says national security, I'm sorry, it's national security. We cannot reply to that FOIA request. I was very disappointed when I went to law school, and there was a center at my at my law school, and I chose not to work for it. But the whole work was based on getting around FOIA requests. Give me all the reasons why we can give the government processes not to disclose information. And I felt like it was totally misguided. We all want privacy. We all want a strong national security. We do need to make trade-offs, and we do have to have checks and balances. But overarchingly, we should still err on the side of privacy, individual privacy and liberties over the rights of the government. So, talked a little bit about FERPA. Came about in 1974, became very serious. FERPA, I've had horror story cases. Someone in Austin I met one time was paying for her son's school. She believed he had dropped out, cashed in his tuition, and was on drugs. But under FERPA, she could not get access to find out if he was enrolled at the University of Texas because he was over 18, although she was paying the bills. This is kind of what happens, just what I said. The rights of the individual privacy have to be paramount. Now, ethically, we could say the school should have given her rights because she wanted to intercede on her son's behalf. Legally, they could not. So remember, it's about the law, okay? So this is to protect the privacy of student records. I can't see your financial records. I can't see your grades for classes other than mine. Not even the department head in computer science can see my grades. They cannot change them. It is a fireable offense at Texas A&M if I took my password when I give you your grades and shared it. I mean, you could be called in and said, we don't care who you are. Now, are they going to always do it? I don't know. I don't care. The fact that it could be a fireable offense, that is the level of scrutiny for privacy. You don't do this. Why? Because our students deserve to have their private data known to as few people as possible. The department head doesn't need to know your grades. I can't get into your finances. That's the way it ought to be. Okay, we talked about this earlier. Again, it's been amended again. It was passed in, I think, 1984, as I said, on reaction to a movie, and then 94, 96, 2001, 2008. It's under review now. As the EU has changed things, they've about unauthorized party access that they shouldn't have access to. Sometimes it affects our CFAA, or sometimes it brings into questions issues that we haven't addressed. I have followed GDPR the 2 years that it was first said it was going to be enacted and then enacted. And I always thought the commentary was kind of funny, where you would have European commentators say Americans don't know what privacy is, and they're like children. They don't know how to protect it, but we do. So the CFAA does get revisited. It is being revisited now under the present administration to allow hacking back. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, again, certain things, you shouldn't be allowed to collect information on kids 13 and under. You'll see some of these web forms, click this if you're over 18 or whatever. There's what is interesting is the U.S. laws on children privacy is actually a better law than what's under GDPR, which is also kind of funny. It's like sometimes they beat us, sometimes we beat them. I'm not going to talk about this one. This is basically outdated. This may still be in force. Laws can be on the books. There's many ways to get civil remedies, for inappropriate posting of pictures on the internet that postdates that law, since that law is old and the technology changed. HIPAA's on medical. You know about this. You're all under HIPAA. You sign the forms. You're diligent. When I have a doctor that you'd fill out a piece of paper every time you went in for annual name, address, social security number, and time you arrived. And I would be like, why am I putting my social security number on here? It hasn't changed. What happens to these pieces of paper? I should only be asked to give you my address if it changed, I think they're glad I only come in once a year. Then this HIPAA's language, notice of privacy practices, covered entities, anything that touches medical facilities, building, insurance, rehab, anything. My mother was a scrub nurse when I was growing up, and I think of the story she used to tell around the evening supper table that today would be in violation of federal law, right? And Gramm-Leach Biley Act, what we talked about. All of these have notions of privacy built into them. Okay, that's going to end video 1, get to video 2, and that's where we're going to talk about GDPR. Stay tuned.